My name is Rachel Monroe. I am 41 years old, a senior financial analyst who shifted to remote work so I could care for my mother without strangers in the house. Numbers are my craft. Patience is my tool. On the evening of her 75th birthday, the villa smelled of rosemary from the garden, chicken roasting in white wine, and a faint sweetness from the lemon cake cooling in the kitchen. The windows breathed in the last light of day. Candles flickered along the length of the dining table, casting shadows that danced across polished silver and the worn oak floor. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table wearing her sky blue dress and the pearl pin my father had given her on their 25th anniversary. She looked tired, but her smile softened the fine lines around her mouth. I poured wine for the guests, neighbors from 2 houses down, an old friend from church, Vanessa and her husband, Colin. Vanessa rose from her seat, glass in hand. She knew how to command attention without raising her voice. Colin leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping the stem of his glass, eyes fixed on her like a director watching a lead actor deliver the perfect scene. The room quieted. Even the subtle scrape of a fork stopped. She tapped her glass twice, waited for every eye, then said with a smile that was almost tender, "On this special day, I have wonderful news. Mom will soon be moving to Rosewood Manor, a place where she'll have every comfort. And this villa," she let her gaze travel slowly over the high ceilings and antique molding, "will be sold. Rachel, you should start packing. The realtor is ready." The words arrived in my chest like a hard, clean punch. Around us there was no outrage, only polite approval. A man at the far end said, "That's fantastic, Eleanor," and a neighbor remarked on how quickly properties like this were selling. Glasses clinked. A chorus of toasts rose. I looked at my mother. Her lips moved as if to speak, but no sound came. Her fingers tightened on her napkin until the linen puckered. She nodded faintly, as if agreeing would make the moment less sharp. Vanessa crossed the room and placed a hand on my shoulder, angling her body so the gesture looked affectionate to the crowd. The slight pressure of her fingers told me it was anything but. I set my glass down. The click against the wood sounded louder than it should. My chest felt hollow, my breath measured. Without a word, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of the legs against the floor turned a few heads, but conversation quickly resumed. The hallway beyond the dining room was dim, carrying a faint scent of rain from the open window. My hand brushed the smooth brass of the doorknob before I pulled it open. Outside, the air was cooler, threaded with the smell of wet earth and the roses by the gate. I took out my phone, the contact already waiting, one I had labeled long ago for the kind of night you hope never arrives. The porch, light carved a pale circle on the bricks, drawing moths into its glow. I leaned against the iron railing, its chill seeping into my palms, grounding me. The muffled hum of voices from inside felt distant, almost unreal. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice. "Rachel," came the voice on the other end, steady, precise. "It's happening," I said. "Tonight." Ethan Shaw, attorney and longtime friend, didn't waste words. 20 minutes, I'll meet you at the gate. Mrs. Grant should be there." "She will," I replied. I ended the call, sliding the phone back into my pocket. A gust of wind carried the scent of rain-soaked ivy from the sidewall. I closed my eyes briefly, counting down the minutes. Ethan would come from the east road, Mrs. Grant from the narrow lane near the orchard. Every movement inside the house in those 20 minutes would matter. I crouched beside the planter by the steps, retrieving a tin box I had hidden there weeks ago. Inside was my father's brass ring, a folded page covered in small, neat handwriting, and a flash drive wrapped in cloth. The page held a list of every guest in the dining room, along with quiet notes, who tended to speak first, who avoided conflict, who would remember details without being prompted. The flash drive contained something far less ordinary: transaction records, account summaries, and a 2-minute clip that spoke louder than any accusation. I had gathered them slowly, carefully. Tonight, they would find their audience. I replaced the tin, straightened, and took one slow breath. Anger was tempting. Anger was quick. But strategy could last as long as I needed it to. When I re-entered, the warmth of the house hit me like a wave. Vanessa's laughter floated over the table. Colin leaned toward a neighbor, gesturing expansively about real estate trends. My mother's hands stayed folded in her lap. her gaze drifting toward the darkened windows. I bent down, kissed her temple. "You're all right," I whispered. Her fingers curled lightly around mine in answer. I sat, lifted my glass, and caught Colin's eye just long enough for him to look away. In my mind, the clock had already started its slow, deliberate countdown. Months earlier, life in the villa was quiet. My desk in the sunroom let me work while keeping my mother in sight as she napped on the couch, a light blanket over her legs. She needed help with the stairs, and sometimes her memory faltered. I kept labels on drawers and left the hall light on through the night. Vanessa began calling more often. Her tone carried a warmth it hadn't in years. And she visited with small gifts: flowers, a scarf, once a bottle of wine. The first time she brought Colin, he complimented the hardwood floors, the built-in shelves, the way the afternoon light fell across the room. But I noticed the way his gaze lingered on the structure, not the people. A few weeks later, Vanessa mentioned Rosewood Manor, framing it as an idea for company and care. I brushed it aside. Then I found a brochure folded into my coat pocket, glossy with images of landscaped gardens and spotless hallways. Soon, she offered to take over property taxes. I declined. 2 weeks later, she asked to automate bill payments, so I wouldn't have to think about them. I refused again. Then came the withdrawals, 2 large sums marked as advisory fees, sent to a firm with no real office, only a mailbox near Colin's business address. I printed the statements, slid them into a plain folder. I began noticing patterns on nights Vanessa and Colin cooked. My mother was unusually sluggish the next day. Once, I found an unmarked bottle near the kettle. Vanessa called it a little sleep help. I quietly discarded it. That's when I reached out to Mrs. Grant, our neighbor and retired nurse. She agreed to keep watch. Weeks later, she handed me a notebook filled with dates and times Colin had left the villa carrying thick envelopes. The memories of Vanessa pulling me out of icy water when I was 12 still sat beside my suspicions. That was the hardest part. Reconciling the sister who once saved me with the one who now moved pieces on a board I hadn't agreed to play on. By the time the gold script invitation to my mother's birthday arrived, I had everything I needed, except the moment. That, I knew, was coming. The villa had stood for nearly a century, a red brick heart in the middle of a quiet street lined with sycamores. Its bricks were worn but strong, holding the scent of rain long after storms passed. Roses grew along the western wall, the kind my mother had planted decades ago, blush pink in spring, deep crimson by late summer. Their petals always caught the evening light in a way that made the whole garden seem suspended in gold. Inside, the air carried the faint aroma of old books and lavender polish from the wooden banister. My father had built the shelves in the study himself, each one slightly uneven because he'd insisted on hand-planing the wood. The living room windows were tall, framed with white curtains my mother had sewn when I was 12. They swayed with every breeze, letting in the scent of the garden and the distant sound of church bells on Sundays. My days followed a rhythm I had shaped with care. I woke before sunrise, made coffee strong enough to cut through the morning fog, and settled in the sunroom with my laptop. From there, I could see the back garden and the path to the gate. My mother usually rose an hour later, moving slowly but with the same dignity she had always carried. She liked her tea just after 8, with a slice of toast and a dab of honey. We shared lunch at the small table in the kitchen, sunlight spilling over the blue and white tiles. I'd read her the headlines from the local paper, skipping over anything too heavy. In the afternoons, she napped on the couch while I returned to spreadsheets and conference calls, the low hum of her breathing in the background like a metronome keeping me steady. Dinner was our anchor. Sometimes I cooked. Sometimes she insisted on making her chicken pot pie, though I would end up taking over the heavier steps. Afterward, we would sit in the living room with the fireplace lit, even in mild weather, because she said the flames made the room feel alive. She told me stories from her youth, bike rides to the lake, dances in the church hall, the day she met my father. I stored each story carefully, as if one day I might need to piece her memory back together. The house felt safe, but the edges of that safety frayed in quiet ways. The property taxes had risen again. The last water bill had been higher than usual. The roof needed repair in one corner where the gutter sagged. I had enough savings, but I knew the numbers. A house like this could swallow money faster than I could earn it. Then there was my mother's health. Some days she was sharp and quick to laugh. Other days she would pause mid-sentence, eyes clouding as if searching for a word that had slipped away. I kept a notebook in the kitchen, jotting down small changes I noticed, times she forgot where she put her keys, or when she left the kettle on. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to plant a seed of worry that never quite stopped growing. At night after she went to bed, I walked through the house, checking the locks, listening to the faint creak of settling beams. The moonlight through the hallway window painted the floor in silver. I would stand there for a moment, hand on the railing, feeling both the weight and the comfort of the life we had built inside these walls. I told myself the villa was more than a house. It was our history, our anchor, and as long as I kept it standing, I could keep everything else from slipping away. But somewhere deep down, I also knew that anchors can rust, that even the strongest walls can hide cracks you don't see until it's too late. It was a mild Saturday in early spring when Vanessa and Colin showed up unannounced. The roses along the west wall were just beginning to open, and the air carried the scent of damp soil from the morning rain. I was in the kitchen, drying dishes, when the doorbell rang. Vanessa breezed in first, wearing a cream trench coat and sunglasses she didn't bother to remove indoors. "We were in the neighborhood," she said, setting a small bag of pastries on the counter. Colin followed, tall and measured, offering me a handshake that felt more like a formality than a greeting. His eyes moved past me, scanning the room as if cataloging every detail. They joined my mother in the living room. She brightened at the sight of them, patting the couch cushion beside her. Vanessa sat close, draping an arm around her shoulders in a way that seemed rehearsed. Colin wandered toward the window, his fingertips grazing the polished wood frame. He leaned in, looking out at the garden, and let his hand slide slowly along the sill. "Vintage craftsmanship," he said, almost to himself. Then, with a small nod, "Valuable." Something about the way he said it, low, appreciative, as if he were speaking to the wood rather than to us, made the back of my neck prickle. Vanessa began asking about the heating system, the cost of roof repairs, whether the plumbing had ever been updated. She framed it as concern for Mom's comfort, but her questions had the rhythm of an appraisal checklist. I answered briefly, resisting the urge to ask why she cared so much about maintenance now, after years of barely visiting. Colin turned from the window to examine the bookshelf, trailing his finger along the spines. "Homes like this, they're a dying breed," he said. "On the market right now, demand is high, especially for properties with original features." He glanced at me, smiling as if it were a compliment. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "We're not selling," I said. The words hung there for a moment before Vanessa broke into a laugh that sounded just a little too bright. "Of course not," she said. "But you never know what the future holds. It's good to think ahead." She reached for Mom's hand, squeezing it gently. Mom looked from her to me, her smile tightening at the corners. The conversation shifted to small talk, weather, local events, but the undercurrent had already settled in the room. Colin's gaze kept drifting to the crown molding, the fireplace, the staircase with its carved banister. He touched things lightly, almost reverently, as though each curve and edge was part of a private inventory. When they left an hour later, the house felt colder, as if their presence had let in a draft that lingered even after the door closed. I walked into the living room and stood where Colin had been at the window. My reflection in the glass looked faint against the garden's green. I placed my palm where his had rested. The wood was warm from the sun, but I still felt that strange chill at the base of my spine. Mom called from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea. I told her I'd join her in a minute. Instead, I stayed there, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers, wondering how much of that visit had been about family and how much had been about the house. 2 weeks later, I had to leave for a brief work trip, just overnight, downstate, for a client meeting I couldn't postpone. Mrs. Grant, our neighbor, had agreed to check in on Mom during the day. I stocked the fridge, labeled containers, and left notes by the kettle in case Mom needed reminders. When I returned the next evening, the villa was unusually quiet. Mom was in her armchair, the television on but muted, a soft blue light flickering across her face. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes seemed heavy, almost unfocused. "Hi, Mom," I said, setting my bag by the door. "Did you eat dinner?" She looked at me for a long moment before answering, "Yes, maybe. Did you make chicken soup?" "I wasn't here, remember?" I kept my voice gentle, but a knot began to form in my stomach. Her brow furrowed as she tried to recall. "Oh, right. Vanessa came by. She brought something for me." In the kitchen, I noticed the faint scent of chamomile mixed with something sharper, metallic at the edges. That's when I saw it on the counter. A small amber bottle, no label, just a plain white cap. I picked it up. It was warm, as if it had been sitting near the stove. "What's this?" I called back toward the living room. "Oh, that," she said, her voice drifting in. "Vanessa gave it to me. She said it would help me sleep better, and it did. I slept all afternoon." The words were meant to reassure me, but instead they tightened that knot inside me. I opened the bottle and caught the faint, bitter smell of sedatives, something I'd recognized from hospital stays long ago. "When did you take it?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "This morning, with tea," she said. Then I watched the birds in the garden. Next thing I knew, it was dark. I poured a little of the liquid into a spoon. It was clear, almost oily. I set the spoon down carefully, my mind racing. Vanessa had no medical training. She hadn't mentioned anything about Mom's sleep to me. Why would she give her something unmarked, unprescribed? But suspicion without proof was just air. It moved nothing. I needed to know more before confronting her. "Maybe don't take any more until we know exactly what it is," I said, placing the cap back on and tucking the bottle into the back of the pantry. She nodded, but her expression was vague, already drifting toward the television. That night, after Mom went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I typed out a message to Ethan Shaw, then deleted it. I wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I made a note in the same notebook where I'd been recording her memory slips. April 14th, Vanessa visit. Gave Mom unmarked bottle. Slept entire afternoon. I flipped the page and wrote another line in smaller letters. Need to verify contents. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked past midnight. The bottle's presence lingered in my mind, like the echo of a word you almost remember but can't quite place. In the morning, Mom seemed better, brighter, though slower to get up. She didn't mention the bottle again, and I didn't bring it up. Instead, I made her tea and toast, listening to the soft scrape of her butter knife against the plate. On the surface, life slid back into its rhythm. But beneath it, a quiet shift had taken place. I began watching more closely, timing visits, noting small changes in her mood and energy. I didn't yet have the shape of what was happening, but I could feel it pressing in. Like the air before a storm, Mrs. Grant knocked on my door the following Tuesday, just after lunch. She stood there with her cardigan buttoned all the way up, her gray hair pinned neatly, holding a plate covered with foil. "Thought you might like some peach cobbler," she said, her eyes scanning my face. I invited her in, pouring tea while she set the plate on the counter. She hesitated, then said, "Rachel, there's something I think you should know." Her voice dropped as we sat at the table. "I've seen Colin here a few times when you weren't home, always late afternoon. He leaves in a hurry, but he doesn't come out empty-handed." "What do you mean?" I asked. She made a gesture, both hands miming a thick envelope. About this big. Not once, but several times over the past month. Always tucking it under his jacket before heading to his car. My stomach tightened. "Are you sure it was him?" She nodded firmly. "I worked as a nurse for 30 years. I don't forget faces. And his car is hard to miss. New black Mercedes with those flashy rims." I thought of the unmarked bottle in the pantry. The way Vanessa and Colin had looked at the villa like a prize on display. The idea that he'd been taking something from the house while I was away wrapped around me like cold wire. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked. I didn't want to make trouble if it was nothing, but after the third time, I knew it wasn't just coincidence. She sipped her tea, eyes steady on mine. "Rachel, you need to keep a close watch. If they're planning something, it'll happen when you least expect it." Her words landed with the weight of a warning honed by experience. Mrs. Grant wasn't prone to drama. In all the years I'd known her, she'd been level-headed, even blunt, but never reckless with her words. I leaned back in my chair, thinking fast. If I confronted Vanessa now, she'd deny it, twist the story, maybe even turn Mom against me. If I did nothing, I'd be handing them time and space to do whatever they were planning. "I need your help," I said. Would you mind keeping a record? Dates, times, anything you see, no matter how small. Her eyes lit with something between determination and protectiveness. I can do that. I'm home most days, and I can see your front porch from my kitchen window. If Colin shows up, I'll write it down. If I can get a photo, I will. We agreed on a simple system. She'd text me a single word, package, if she saw him leave with anything. No details in writing, too easy for a message to be intercepted. Before she left, she put a hand on my arm. I've seen families torn apart by money. It's worse when it's dressed up as concern. Watch yourself, Rachel. After she was gone, I stood at the sink, staring out at her neat backyard, the rows of marigolds and tomatoes in early bloom. I realized I trusted her more than I trusted my own sister. That night, I lay in bed with the cobbler untouched in the fridge, my mind replaying every recent visit, every offhand comment from Vanessa, every sidelong glance from Colin. The pattern was still blurry, but the pieces were starting to connect, each one another reason to be ready before they made their move. The next morning, I sat down at my laptop with a mug of coffee, determined to comb through Mom's finances. I had joint access to her checking account to pay bills and manage her prescriptions, but I'd never gone line by line with suspicion before. Most transactions were familiar: utility bills, groceries, the occasional lunch at the cafe down the street. Then my eyes froze on a debit entry from 2 weeks earlier. $4,800, consulting fee. Mom hadn't hired a consultant in her life. I opened the transaction details, noting the payee, Havenbrook Advisory Services. The name sounded polished but hollow, the kind of company that thrived on vague descriptions. I searched the business registry, my fingers tapping harder with each step. The listed owner was Crestmore Holdings, LLC. My pulse spiked when I scrolled further. Managing partner, Colin Whitaker. I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me. $4,800 from Mom's account to a company tied directly to my brother-in-law. I checked her statement again. The withdrawal had been made on a Thursday, the same day Mrs. Grant said she'd seen Colin leaving with a thick envelope. I opened Mom's email on my tablet, using the password she'd given me years ago for her medical correspondence. At first, there was nothing unusual. Doctors' reminders, newsletters, charity appeals. Then, buried in her sent folder, I found an email chain that made my stomach turn. It began innocently enough. Vanessa writing to Colin about options for streamlining household expenses. But 2 messages in, the tone shifted. Colin wrote, "If we can get Rachel out of the picture, we can move forward with listing. The market's hot now, best to act before she catches on." Vanessa's reply was brisk. "She's too comfortable. We need to make her think it's her idea to leave, or force her hand." I read those lines 3 times, my jaw tightening until it ached. This wasn't just about selling the villa, it was about removing me entirely, as if I were a piece of furniture in the way. The timestamp on the last email was from 3 days ago. They weren't just planning, they were actively moving toward it. I copied the thread to an encrypted drive, then took screenshots and sent them to my secure cloud folder. Evidence needed to be preserved, quietly, without tipping my hand. My first instinct was to call Vanessa to demand an explanation, but rage was a blunt instrument, and I needed precision. If they were willing to siphon money from Mom under the guise of consulting fees, what else had they already done? I pulled up 6 months of statements, scanning for other irregularities. 3 smaller withdrawals caught my eye. $750 here, $1,200 there, each marked under ambiguous service. Descriptions. When I checked the routing numbers, 2 matched subsidiaries of Crestmore Holdings. The air in the study felt heavier, the faint scent of old paper now tinged with the acrid bite of betrayal. From the window, I could see the roses nodding in the breeze, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them was shifting. I closed my laptop, forcing my breathing to slow. Mrs. Grant's words echoed in my head. If they're planning something, it'll happen when you least expect it. She had been right. The difference now was, I expected it, and I intended to be ready. 3 days after I uncovered the emails, Vanessa called me out of the blue. Her voice was syrupy, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. "Rachel, I've been thinking," she began. "It's been such a long time since we all had a proper family celebration. Mom's 75th deserves something special, a big party. Friends, neighbors, the works. The idea sounded generous, but the hairs on the back of my neck rose. Vanessa didn't do big, unless it served her in some way. That's a lot to organize, I replied carefully. Oh, don't worry about a thing, she said quickly. Colin and I will handle it. We've already thought about catering, music, even a photographer. You just keep Mom relaxed. Let us treat her. The call ended with her promising to send me a guest list, just for reference. My instincts screamed. This wasn't just a party, it was a stage. I dialed Ethan Shaw as soon as I hung up. He answered on the second ring. Rachel, what's happened? They're planning something, a big gathering for Mom's birthday. I think it's the moment they'll make their move. What kind of move? He asked. I told him about the emails, the withdrawals, the consulting fee linked to Colin. There was a pause on the line before Ethan said, if they do it at the party, everyone will see. That could be our chance. His plan was methodical. First, he would prepare injunction papers to freeze any sale or transfer of property. Second, he'd arrange for a discreet process server to be on standby. If Vanessa or Colin attempted anything overt, like producing documents for Mom to sign, he could serve them in front of witnesses. Rachel, between now and the party, document everything, he instructed. Receipts, phone calls, even overheard conversations. The stronger the evidence, the harder they fall. That night, I began setting digital traps. I placed a small voice-activated recorder in the living room, where Mom and Vanessa usually sat for tea. I checked the placement of the security cameras, making sure they covered the front entry and driveway. I even added an old smartphone in the kitchen, disguised as a charging station, set to record whenever motion was detected. Meanwhile, I played my role as the dutiful daughter. With Mom, I was warm and present. With Vanessa, I was polite but vague, never revealing my suspicions. Each interaction was another thread in the net I was weaving. A week before the party, Vanessa dropped by to discuss decorations. She carried a glossy folder, which she kept closed the entire visit, only opening it once when Mom was alone with her. I walked in just in time to see Vanessa slide a pen across the table toward Mom. What's that? I asked lightly. Oh, just a guest list, she said, closing the folder. Her smile was quick and brittle. After she left, I found a post-it note under the teapot with a single word in Mrs. Grant's tidy handwriting: package. My pulse quickened. By the time the day of the party approached, the villa looked picture-perfect. Fresh roses lined the walkway, and the dining room was set with polished silver and crystal glasses. To any outsider, it was a celebration. To me, it was the calm before a storm I was finally ready to meet head-on. The morning of the party, I woke earlier than usual. The villa was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every sound stand out. The creak of the floorboards under my slippers, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock in the hallway. I brewed coffee strong enough to sharpen my focus, then tied my hair back and set to work. I had decided that if this was going to be a battleground, it would also be a memory worth keeping for Mom. I pulled out the heavy oak table leaves from storage and extended the dining table until it almost touched the walls. The linen cloth, white with a subtle damask pattern, was one my grandmother had given Mom as a wedding gift. It had been tucked away for years, waiting for an occasion that mattered. Next came the photographs. I spent hours choosing them from the cedar chest upstairs. Black and white shots of Mom and Dad in the early days, sun-faded Polaroids of me and Vanessa in matching dresses, snapshots of family picnics by the lake. I arranged them along the mantel and side tables, each in a polished frame. It felt like arming myself with a visual reminder of who we were before greed began eroding the edges. In the kitchen, I simmered a pot of Mom's favorite beef bourguignon, the smell filling the air with warm notes of red wine and thyme. A bakery downtown had made the cake, a 3-layer chocolate with raspberry filling, and I placed it carefully in the fridge, resisting the urge to slice into it. I opened the wine rack and pulled out a bottle of Bordeaux from the year Mom married Dad. She had saved it for someday, and I decided today, whatever else happened, would be that day. As I worked, I kept glancing at the clock. Every task felt like both preparation and defense, as if the more perfect I made the celebration, the harder it would be for Vanessa to twist the narrative. But the thought of her and Colin walking through that door still coiled tension in my chest. Around mid-morning, Mom came into the kitchen, leaning on her cane but smiling at the smells. "You didn't have to do all this, Rachel," she said softly. "I wanted to," I replied, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You deserve it." She touched my hand briefly, a gesture that said more than words. I wondered how much she really understood about the undercurrent in our family right now. By noon, I'd set the dining table with silverware polished, until it caught the light like a mirror. Crystal glasses stood ready for the toast, each one reflecting the flicker of candles I would light later. Fresh roses from the garden were arranged in vases, deep red for elegance, pale pink for warmth. In the back of my mind, I reviewed Ethan's instructions. Stay close to Mom, keep an eye on Vanessa's folder or any documents, and signal him if things shifted. I'd already confirmed he was in town, ready to act if the moment came. As I placed the last chair, I caught my reflection in the window. My expression was calm, but my eyes were sharper than I remembered. This wasn't just about defending a house. It was about defending the years and memories built inside it. The doorbell rang unexpectedly early, and my pulse jumped. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even 2. The party wasn't set to start for another hour. I wiped my hands on a towel and headed for the door, telling myself it was probably a caterer or a neighbor dropping something off. But deep down, I knew better. When I opened the door, the first guests were already standing on the porch, their coats buttoned against the cool afternoon breeze. Mrs. Hanley, Mom's bridge partner from years back, handed me a tin of homemade shortbread before stepping inside. Behind her came the Millers from 2 houses down, carrying a bouquet of daisies that still had drops of water clinging to their stems. I ushered them into the living room, where the photographs and flowers I'd arranged drew immediate attention. Their smiles warmed the room, but I felt the undercurrent beneath every pleasantry. More guests trickled in, neighbors, old friends of Mom's from church, and then a few faces I didn't recognize. A tall man in a tailored suit, accompanied by a woman wearing a diamond tennis bracelet, introduced themselves as friends of Colin. They glanced around the villa in a way that made my stomach tighten, eyes measuring space, mentally assigning value. Vanessa arrived about 20 minutes later, dressed in a cream silk blouse and a pencil skirt, her hair in loose waves that looked like they'd taken a professional an hour to style. Colin followed close behind, a hand resting lightly on her back, his expression already locked in a polite smile. They worked the room in tandem, shaking hands, leaning in for short conversations, laughing in practiced bursts. From across the dining table, I caught Colin casting a quick look toward the large antique armoire in the corner, his eyes lingering a fraction too long. Vanessa noticed, and in a moment too brief for anyone else to catch, they exchanged a glance, just enough for me to know they were in sync on something unspoken. Mom came down the stairs slowly, wearing the soft blue dress she'd had since I was a teenager. It fit her loosely now, but the color still brought out the pale brightness of her eyes. She smiled at each guest, but I noticed the faint shadow under her cheekbones, the way her shoulders sloped just a little more than usual. "You look beautiful, Mom," I whispered as I kissed her cheek. She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad everyone's here. It's been too long." I helped her to the armchair near the fireplace, making sure she had a clear view of the room without being in the direct path of the busiest foot traffic. I wanted her comfortable but protected, a center of attention without being exposed. As the afternoon light shifted through the windows, the noise in the room grew, a mix of clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and the occasional hushed exchange. I kept catching Vanessa and Colin at the edges of these clusters, steering conversations toward the history of the villa, its impressive upkeep, and the changing market. It was subtle, almost imperceptible unless you were listening for it. From the kitchen, I saw Mrs. Grant arrive, slipping in quietly with a covered dish. She caught my eye and gave the smallest nod before blending into a group near the dining table. My pulse steadied just a little. Having her here was like having a second set of eyes, someone who understood that not all smiles were genuine. When I returned to refill Mom's tea, she leaned toward me slightly. "Rachel," she murmured, "Vanessa keeps asking me to sign something later, says it's just for the party photographs." I kept my expression neutral. "We'll talk about it when the time comes," I said softly, placing the cup in her hands. Inside, I felt the knot in my stomach pull tighter. The night hadn't even reached its peak, and already the edges of their plan were showing. The clinking of silverware against plates faded as Vanessa stood near the head of the table, her glass of champagne raised high. The late afternoon sun caught in the crystal, sending little prisms of light across her silk blouse. "I just want to say," she began, her voice warm and inviting, "how grateful I am to see so many faces here celebrating Mom's 75th. She turned slightly toward Mom, who smiled faintly, her hands folded in her lap. Vanessa let the moment breathe, too long, almost calculated. Then, with a bright laugh, she said, "And there's something else. A bit of exciting news." The room quieted. Even the soft music in the background seemed to recede. She looked straight at me. "Rachel, it's time to pack your bags. This villa is going up for sale." A ripple of laughter passed through the guests, genuine in some, awkward in others. Glasses were lifted, toasts murmured, as if she'd just announced an inheritance or a vacation. Colin's smile widened, a hand resting casually on the back of her chair. My body stayed perfectly still, but I felt a rush of cold run down my spine, a sharp current that made my fingers tighten around my glass. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and deliberate, over the hum of the room. Mom's brow furrowed. "Vanessa, what?" she began, but Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "Oh, don't worry, Mom. This is all good news. The market is at its peak, and Colin's already found interested buyers. This house is far too much for you to manage at this stage of life. We'll get you somewhere comfortable, and Rachel can settle somewhere else." The guests chuckled again, some nodding in agreement, others glancing between us with polite confusion. I glanced at Mrs. Grant, who was standing near the buffet table, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp on Vanessa. Vanessa turned back to the crowd. "We're so fortunate to have this opportunity, and I think it deserves a toast. To new beginnings." Colin raised his glass, leading the cheer. The chime of crystal filled the room again. I set my glass down, deliberately slow, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline clawing through me. I caught Mom's gaze. Her confusion was mixed with something else now, a flicker of unease. "You're selling my home?" she asked quietly. The words nearly drowned by the clamor of voices. Vanessa bent toward her, her tone low but not low enough for me to miss. "It's for the best. Rachel will understand eventually." I didn't answer, not yet. My role right now was to listen, to let them speak without realizing they were giving me more than I could have hoped for. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. "If they make their move in front of witnesses, it's better for us." The room shifted back into motion, people returning to their conversations, laughter resuming. But under it all, I felt the weight of the moment settle into place. They had played their hand earlier than I expected, and they thought they were winning. I reached for my phone under the table, my thumb moving with practiced precision, sending a single text to Ethan. "It's happening now." The champagne still fizzed in my glass, untouched. Around me, the party carried on as if nothing had changed. But for me, the temperature in the room had dropped, and the game had just moved to my side of the board. I excused myself with a quiet smile, murmuring something about checking on the dessert. No one stopped me. They were too busy clinking glasses and chatting about the good fortune Vanessa had just announced. The hallway beyond the dining room was dimmer, the warm glow from the party fading with each step I took toward the front door. I could still hear the hum of conversation behind me, but it sounded muffled now, like a radio turned down in another room. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. The late afternoon sun had slipped behind, the trees casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. I took a deep breath, pulling my phone from my pocket, the weight of it suddenly feeling like a trigger in my hand. I scrolled to the contact I'd saved under a deliberately bland label. Mr. E. My thumb hovered for half a second before I pressed the call button. He picked up on the first ring. "Rachel." His tone was direct, no wasted words. "It's happening," I said, my voice low but steady. There was a pause, then the faint rustle of paper on his end. "I'll be there in 20. I'm bringing the folder and a witness." "Mrs. Grant?" "Yes. She has everything you asked her to document. Times, dates, photos. We're covered." The knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. Good. They made their move earlier than I expected. In front of everyone. "That works in our favor," he said. "Keep them talking. Don't challenge them yet. The more they say now, the more they'll have to explain later. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Understood. From inside, a burst of laughter erupted, sharp and jarring against the quiet of the driveway. I glanced back through the front windows. Vanessa was leaning over Mom's chair, gesturing with her champagne glass, while Colin chatted with the man in the tailored suit. It was a picture of casual confidence, like they already owned the place. They're comfortable right now, I told Ethan. Too comfortable. Good, he replied. Let them stay that way until I arrive. Then we flip the script. A wind stirred the leaves in the hydrangea bushes along the porch, carrying with it the faint scent of the roast chicken still baking in the oven. For a moment, the smell pulled me back to better days. Holidays when Vanessa and I would set the table together, when Colin was just a name I'd hear in passing. That memory made the present sting even more. I tightened my grip on the phone. Ethan, when we do this, I want it clean. No drama for Mom. She's not ready for the truth yet. His voice softened slightly. I know. We'll protect her, but we'll also make sure they can't touch this place again. Thank you. We hung up, and I stood there for a beat longer, letting the cold air steady my breathing. My pulse was still racing, but there was a focus to it now. The uncertainty I'd felt all week had hardened into something sharper, something that could cut if it needed to. Through the glass, I saw Mrs. Grant moving closer to the dining room door, her eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. Even from here, I could tell she was already taking mental notes. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, smoothed the front of my dress, and opened the door to step inside. The warmth of the party hit me instantly, along with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of voices. I walked back toward the table, ready to play my part, until the real scene began. The moment I stepped back into the warmth of the dining room, I scanned the space. Vanessa and Colin were still deep in conversation with a cluster of guests near the fireplace, their laughter a little too loud, their gestures a little too polished. No one was paying attention to me. Perfect. I slipped down the hallway toward the back of the house, my heels silent on the Persian runner. The scent of lavender sachets clung to the air here, a comfort that had lingered since my mother's early years in this villa. I paused at her bedroom door, listening. Silence. Inside, the room was softly lit. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. On her dresser sat the framed photo of us at the county fair, a reminder of simpler times. My gaze shifted to the small wooden cabinet beside her bed. I knew exactly where to look. I opened the top drawer slowly, careful not to disturb the folded scarves inside, and reached for the back corner. My fingers closed around a small amber bottle with no label, the same one I'd seen weeks ago in the kitchen. The cap rattled faintly as I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. Every second in here was borrowed time. I closed the drawer and stepped back, letting my eyes sweep the room to make sure nothing looked disturbed. My mother's trust was one thing I wouldn't compromise, even now. As I turned to leave, a shadow moved in the doorway. Mrs. Grant stood there, her small frame outlined by the light from the hall. I've got the footage, she whispered, her voice low enough to vanish into the quiet hum of the house. I met her eyes. From today? She nodded once. From the moment they arrived. Colin took a phone call outside before dinner, looked like a business call. I caught the tail end on my camera, and there's more from earlier this week too. Relief mixed with urgency in my chest. Hold on to it until Ethan gets here. Don't let anyone know you have it. Her mouth curved into a wry smile. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, dear. I almost smiled back, but the gravity of what we were doing kept my face still. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying more weight than the 2 words could hold. We walked back toward the main hall together, our pace unhurried, as if we were simply 2 guests catching up. From the dining room, the sound of silverware on china and muffled laughter floated toward us. Near the archway, I stopped. I need to get this to Ethan as soon as he arrives, I said quietly, patting the pocket where the bottle now rested. Mrs. Grant's eyes sharpened. That's exactly what I think it is, isn't it? I'll have it tested, I replied. If it's harmless, fine, but if it's not... My words trailed off, heavy with implication. She gave a single nod, then melted into the crowd, her presence swallowed by the movement of the party. I lingered by the doorway for a moment, watching the easy way Vanessa moved among the guests, her laughter ringing like a performance she'd rehearsed for weeks. Colin's hand never strayed far from her shoulder, his charm practiced and precise. They had no idea that every smile, every word, every careless gesture tonight was being recorded in more ways than one. And they certainly didn't know that the most incriminating piece of evidence was now hidden inches from my hand. I stepped back into the dining room, my expression calm, my pulse steady. The pieces were in place. All I had to do now was wait for Ethan to arrive. Back in the dining room, the noise felt different. Conversations bent around a rumor that traveled faster than the servers carrying plates. I heard listing, timing, and seller's market drift from one cluster to another. Vanessa and Colin fielded friendly questions with easy smiles. I poured tea for my mother and kept my posture relaxed. When people believe you are calm, they reveal themselves. Near the buffet, 2 church friends whispered that the villa would fetch an astonishing price. One lowered her voice and asked if I was excited about a condo with less responsibility. I smiled without answering. Answers are commitments. Tonight I kept mine for later. Mrs. Williams arrived late, cane tapping the floor like a metronome. She had taught Sunday school with my mother. She never wasted breath. She studied the photographs on the mantel, touched the edge of one frame, then found me. "Is this what your mom really wants?" she asked, steady as the cane she held. I held her gaze. "No one has asked her that in a way that counts," I said. "If you do, make sure she is not tired. Make sure no one else answers for her." Mrs. Williams nodded, then sat beside my mother. Their conversation ran low. I watched my mother's face open, then pinch closed, then open again. Doubt had entered the room, and it did not leave. Across the table, Colin launched into a story about amenities, weaving in numbers like a salesman spicing a pitch. A man in the tailored suit laughed on cue, but 2 neighbors did not. One asked about timing. Another said moving in winter would be hard on Eleanor's joints. Vanessa brushed the concern aside with a quick smile that missed her eyes. She raised her glass again. Fewer glasses rose in response. Mrs. Grant drifted near the fireplace and asked the man with the bracelet how he knew our family. He fumbled. He barely knew Vanessa's last name. That answer slipped through the group like a draft under a door. People turned. I felt the air change. I passed my mother a plate with a small slice of cake. She thanked me and squeezed my fingers. Her hands felt warmer now, more present. "Do you like the music?" I asked. She nodded. "It reminds me of Dad," she said, soft and clear. Vanessa appeared at my shoulder. "Rachel, could you help me bring out the champagne?" Her smile showed teeth. "In a minute," I said. "I'm making sure Mom eats first." She moved away, sharper in her heels. Colin watched her go, then looked back at the room, measuring again. He did not see the small island of conversation forming by the entryway, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Grant, and 2 neighbors who had known my mother since grade school. "Is she happy about this?" one of them asked aloud, not bothering to whisper. The question hovered. Silence followed, then the scrape of a chair as someone stood to refill a glass rather than answer. Not every witness speaks. Some choose where not to stand. Near the mantel, a guest set down her glass and moved to stand beside my mother. The quiet gesture carried more weight than any toast offered evening. From the hallway, the doorbell sounded once, clean and bright. I checked my watch without moving my arm. 20 minutes pass quickly when a room begins to think for itself. I looked at my mother. Her chin lifted a fraction, her shoulders squared. The current had shifted. All I had to do was hold the line until help stepped through the door. The front door opened, and Ethan stepped in with the kind of calm that makes people move out of his way. He didn't raise his voice, didn't wave papers in the air. He simply walked to the center of the room like he belonged there. Mrs. Grant followed close behind, carrying her tablet tucked under one arm. "Evening, everyone," Ethan said, his tone polite but deliberate. "My name is Ethan Callahan, attorney at law. I represent Eleanor Monroe and her daughter Rachel." The clinking of silverware stopped. Colin straightened in his seat, a smile stretching across his face like a pulled thread. "Is this really necessary?" Ethan ignored him and pulled a folder from his leather case. Mrs. Monroe executed a durable power of attorney 2 years ago, granting Rachel Monroe co-management authority over all her assets, including this property. No sale, transfer, or encumbrance can occur without her written consent. He laid the document on the table in front of my mother, turning it so she could see her own signature. Vanessa stepped forward, a champagne flute still in her hand. "That's outdated," she said with a thin laugh. "Mom signed a new one last month, naming me sole decision maker. We don't need Rachel's consent anymore." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "May I see that?" Colin pulled a crisp document from his jacket pocket, sliding it across the table with a smug expression. Ethan read in silence, then placed the papers side by side. "Interesting. This second document is dated 3 weeks ago, at a time when Mrs. Monroe was on a sedative known to impair cognition. Under state law, any legal instrument signed while under such influence is voidable. I have both the prescription record and a sworn statement from her physician confirming the timing." The air in the room shifted. Someone coughed. Vanessa's laugh faltered. "This means," Ethan continued, "the original power of attorney remains in full effect. Any action taken without Rachel's co-signature is null and exposes the parties involved to civil and criminal liability." My mother's hand found mine under the table. I could feel her pulse, steady but strong. Across from us, Colin's eyes flicked toward Vanessa, a silent signal that didn't go unnoticed by the guests now watching more closely than before. Ethan reached into his case again. "Unfortunately, this isn't just a matter of paperwork. We have reason to believe there's been financial misconduct." He laid a stack of printed bank statements on the table, sliding them into the center like cards in a high-stakes game. "Over the past 6 months, Mrs. Monroe's account shows a series of large withdrawals labeled consulting fees. The amounts total $78,000. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Those were legitimate. We hired experts to assess the property value." Ethan didn't blink. "Interesting, because the recipient account belongs to a company registered under Colin Reeves. And according to state records, that company was dissolved last year, which means any funds transferred to it were not for legitimate services." A murmur ran through the guests. Mrs. Williams leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Colin, is that true?" Colin's jaw tightened. "It's complicated." "Not really," Ethan said, his voice level but cutting. "It's theft, and if we press charges, you'll be answering to more than just civil court." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "You don't have proof I was involved." Ethan tapped the folder again. "Emails between you and Mr. Reeves discussing how to remove Rachel from the picture to expedite the sale, recovered from a backup server you apparently forgot existed." Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence around her was louder than any accusation. Several guests shifted away, their earlier smiles replaced with narrowed eyes. The first ripple of isolation had begun. Mrs. Grant stepped forward, her tablet now in hand. "If anyone here still thinks this is just a family disagreement," she said, "you might want to see this." She tapped the screen, and a video filled the room with the tinny sound of outdoor wind. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed Colin in our kitchen, leaning casually against the counter. My mother sat at the table, a mug of tea before her. Colin reached into his pocket, removed a small amber bottle, the same one now in my coat, and shook 2 pills into his palm. "Helps you sleep," his voice said, captured cleanly by the mic Mrs. Grant had hidden in a plant pot. My mother hesitated, then took the pills and swallowed them with a sip of tea. Gasps broke out around the room. Mrs. Williams put a hand to her mouth. One of the men Colin had been entertaining earlier stepped back as if physical distance might spare him from the association. "That was recorded last Tuesday," Mrs. Grant said evenly. Mrs. Monroe was already under prescription for mild anxiety. The combination with this, she glanced at me and I knew she meant the bottle in my pocket, is dangerous and given the context, looks deliberate. Colin's face lost its color. Vanessa's eyes darted around, searching for an ally. None came forward. "This," Ethan said, gesturing to the screen, "is why any documents signed in that period are legally questionable, and why we'll be speaking to the district attorney first thing Monday." The guest's posture shifted as if on cue. Where earlier they had clustered around Vanessa and Colin, now they leaned subtly toward my mother, toward me. The current had fully changed direction. Vanessa opened her mouth, but the room's collective silence pressed in. Every set of eyes seemed to hold the same unspoken judgment. And in that moment, I knew. The battle was no longer mine alone to fight. The truth had taken root, and it was spreading fast. Vanessa's hands began to tremble. At first, I thought it was anger, but then her face crumpled. The proud, polished veneer she had worn all evening shattered in a breath. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest table, her voice catching as she tried to speak. I didn't plan for it to go this far," she stammered. Her eyes darted between the guests, then landed on me. "Colin said. He said it was the only way. I was drowning, Rachel. The credit cards, the personal loans. Every day the interest grew. I thought if we sold the villa, I could pay it all off and—" Her voice broke into sobs. The same sister who had once held my hand through the darkness of our father's funeral now stood in front of me, her mascara streaked, her body shaking. "I knew it was wrong," she said, her voice lower, almost to herself. "But I thought, maybe you'd be fine. You always land on your feet." I felt something inside me tighten. Memories rushed in, late nights on the porch with mugs of cocoa, her laughing as we danced to old Motown records. The time she defended me from a neighbor's cruel rumor when I was 16. I had loved her, trusted her, even when life had taken us down very different roads. And now here she was, undone by her own choices, begging not just for forgiveness, but for a lifeline. For a moment, I almost wanted to reach out, to say, "We can fix this." But then I saw my mother's face, pale, weary, and lined with the hurt of a betrayal she hadn't asked for. I felt the weight of the empty bank accounts, the legal papers, the weeks of subtle poisons meant to weaken her. Vanessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Please, Rachel, don't let them take me to court. I'll pay it back, every cent. Just don't ruin me." Her words echoed in the silent room, each syllable a stone dropped into deep water. And I stood there, caught between the sister I remembered and the woman she had become. The room had gone still when my mother rose from her chair. She rested one hand on the edge of the table for balance, her eyes sweeping the space before locking on Vanessa. "Vanessa," she said, her voice steady, almost regal despite her frailty. "I may be old, but I am not blind, and I will not be moved from my home against my will." A faint murmur of agreement passed among the guests, but she raised her hand for silence. "This house holds the memory of your father, the laughter of our children, the life we built. I will remain here with Rachel until the day I am called to leave it. No document, no scheme, no lie will change that." Then she turned to me, her expression softening. "Rachel, I trust you to handle what comes next. You've always protected me, even when I didn't know I needed it." The words landed heavy. She wasn't just giving me permission, she was passing me the weight of the decision. Whether to let the law take its course, or to shield Vanessa from the consequences entirely. Vanessa looked at me with wide, red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, please, tell her to stop this. I'm your daughter too." "I have told her all I need to," my mother replied. "What she chooses to do now, that is between the two of you." In that moment, I realized my mother had done something extraordinary. She had stripped me of any illusion that the choice could be easy. This was no longer just about property or bank accounts. It was about who I wanted to be when the dust settled. I stood there, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the only sound. Every pair of eyes seemed fixed on me, some silently urging compassion, others justice. I took a slow breath. "Vanessa," I began, "I wish this could end differently. I wish you had come to me before you went to him. I wish you'd trusted me the way I trusted you." Her chin quivered, but she said nothing. "But you didn't," I continued. "And because of that, you put Mom's health, her home, and her future at risk. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed her." I nodded to Ethan, who took out his phone and made a quick call. Within minutes, the sound of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of the police. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Rachel, no." I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't look away. "I'm not doing this to ruin you. I'm doing it to protect her, and to make sure no one else falls victim to the kind of trust you and Colin exploited." 2 officers entered, their presence suddenly shrinking the room. They asked for Colin first, and he didn't resist, though his jaw was set in silent rage. They cuffed him and led him toward the door. Then they turned to Vanessa. One of them spoke softly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." She glanced back at me, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite name, fear, regret. maybe even a sliver of understanding. Then she nodded and let them guide her out. When the door closed behind them, the tension in the room seemed to collapse. My mother reached for my hand. "You did what you had to do," she said. I wanted to believe her. But in the quiet that followed, I felt both the sting of loss and the steady burn of resolve. I had chosen the harder road, and now I would walk it, one step at a time. The days after the party moved strangely, as if the air itself had thickened. News traveled fast in a small town. By Monday morning, Colin had been formally charged with fraud, elder abuse, and unlawful financial manipulation. The papers didn't hold back. His photograph, sharp suit, that permanent half-smile, was plastered under bold headlines. Vanessa's name appeared too, but with a smaller typeface. Within a week, I learned she had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, providing testimony against Colin in exchange for a lighter sentence. It was a calculated decision, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to resent it. Her cooperation meant less time in a courtroom for my mother, and less of our private pain turned into public spectacle. One afternoon, an envelope arrived with no return address. I knew the handwriting instantly. It was hers. Inside, a folded piece of lined paper held a letter written in shaky, uneven lines. She admitted her wrongs without excuse, confessed to the shame she carried, and said she hoped one day I could forgive her. She ended with, "You were right to protect Mom, even if it meant losing me." I set the letter down on my desk, tracing the indentations of her pen. I didn't write back. Not yet. The villa was quieter without the constant undercurrent of suspicion. My mother slept better, I slept better. But at night, when the house settled into its bones, I sometimes thought of my sister alone in her apartment, facing a future she'd built with her own hands, and wondering if she still hummed Motown songs when no one was listening. Winter gave way to a gentler spring. The roses in the garden, once neglected, bloomed in slow, deliberate defiance of the months they'd spent starved of care. My mother and I made a ritual of tending to them together, her wide-brimmed hat tilting as she bent over each stem. Inside, the house felt alive again. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and rosemary chicken. The dining room, once a stage for confrontation, now held quiet dinners and unhurried conversation. We talked about books, about neighbors, about memories that didn't hurt to touch. Ethan came over for supper one Friday. He brought a bottle of wine and a smile that told me he'd been worried but was too polite to say it aloud. We sat around the table, the candlelight soft on my mother's face, and for the first time in months, laughter came easily. Mrs. Grant had become a near-daily presence. Sometimes she brought over fresh-baked pies. Other times she simply sat with us on the porch, sipping tea and talking about the weather as if the weather alone could hold the world together. I realized that, without planning it, we had built something, an informal circle of guardians around my mother. In the evenings, I worked in the study, the red brick walls holding the day's warmth. My remote projects picked up again, and I found myself finishing work early just to step outside and watch the sun set over the garden. It wasn't that everything was perfect. The legal process still lingered, and some neighbors still whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. But the villa felt like a place of safety again, and that was enough. By early April, my mother's strength had returned enough for short trips. One bright morning, we drove to Cannon Beach. She wore the same knitted scarf she'd owned for decades, and I carried a picnic basket down to the sand. We sat close to the waterline, the wind sharp but clean, the horizon stretching wide enough to hold every unspoken word between us. We didn't talk much, just listened to the waves and the gulls, letting the sound do the work that language couldn't. At one point, she reached for my hand, and I held it until the tide began to creep closer. A few weeks later, a package arrived on our doorstep. No note, no sender, just a small cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a silver bracelet, tarnished but unmistakable. My father had given it to my sister when she turned 18. I knew then where it had come from and why. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the cool metal against my skin. Regret doesn't erase harm. Apology doesn't restore trust overnight. But sometimes the first step toward repair is simply admitting the break. I placed the bracelet in my mother's jewelry box, beside the keepsakes she still wore on special occasions. Outside, the red brick villa stood exactly as it always had, solid, weathered, unyielding. It was more than a house. It was a witness to what we had survived, and a promise that we could endure again if we had to. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.